Clear prop.
Star 738, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear subject, 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I am fantastic as always. About 2 weeks ago, we recorded and published Mock Checkride Private Part 1, and it was all of the ACS components that we've been going through. We went through everything A through E and kind of covered some of the topics in great detail. If you didn't listen to that episode, jump back and go listen to Part 1. This is Part 2. We're going to start at Task F, Performance and Limitations. We published that show the day Barrel came through Houston, Texas, and we're kind of over the aftermath, but man, that was a rough week, wasn't it, Wally?
Yeah, that was. I mean, I lost power at home and got it back pretty quickly and was feeling pretty fortunate, and then I lost it again for 3 or 4 days, and you were out for quite a while, weren't you?
My house was out for 6 days. The fly school was out for 6 days. I don't know how many people are listening that have never been to Houston, Texas, but let me describe Houston. It is hot and humid. And so when you don't have any air conditioning in Houston, it's a really, really bad deal. I was fortunate enough to have a generator both here and at home. Had a window unit. Well, I went and bought a window unit and installed it in my master bedroom, and the 3 of us and a big dog stayed in one room. I told my wife we could probably downsize to a 1-bedroom, and she didn't like that idea. But it was a rough week without internet. We had no good service, but we did some amazing stuff at the flight school. We had we did 3 check rides thanks to Wally. He weathered the storm and did 2 check rides with no air conditioner. I think there was enough air moving in my office where y'all did the check ride that it probably felt like a breezy day. We had tons of fans in here, and the generator was moving as much air as it could, but we couldn't get the ACs to work. Airport ran out of gas. We were siphoning gas out of other airplanes just to make the check rides work. We did a CFI initial one day, and then we didn't get fuel back till Saturday. So it was a long 5 or 6 days without power and fuel. Power came back on late Saturday, and we opened back up on Sunday. So we've had a lot of pent-up flying demand over the last week and have been gangbusters since then. But things are almost back to normal. If you're still in Houston and listening to this and don't have power, I feel for you, man. That's tough, but not everybody's got it back yet. And it was a little storm that knocked over a lot of trees. It was kind of shocking how much damage was done.
Yeah. I'm replacing fences at my house, but I feel very fortunate the lack of major damage. As I did track the storm, it really went right over my house, I think. I mean, it was tracking north just to the west side of I-45, and that's not far from your flight school, not far from your house, but I think it went almost directly over my house.
Yeah, we were really close to the eye, and that's where the highest winds are on the east side of that. And it's crazy how much wind there was in that thing. And lucky, again, nothing major, just superficial stuff. And compared to most, we were very, very, very lucky. Yeah. So hopefully there's no new hurricanes coming anytime soon. But let's jump right into Task F. So we've talked. We're in the oral. I've been nervous. I've been talking to you. We've qualified everything. We've talked about a number of things. Now we're going to start talking performance and limitations. And in Part 1, we really talked about this is the ACS. This is an open book test. We've talked about this for years. The ACS has been updated, but you have the knowledge. You have the task area. You have the title of the task area. You have the objective that you're being evaluated on in plain English. You have the knowledge areas you have to have. You have the risk management areas and the skills. And Wally, you talked about this on the first episode, but let's just recap. What are your requirements as a DPE in each of these sections, each of these task areas as an examiner? What are you supposed to evaluate?
Yeah, well, when I look at these areas of operation, I do it a little bit backwards. The first thing I jump to is the skills elements. And because as an examiner, we're required to cover every one of the skills elements. Now, the different elements in the knowledge and the risk management, a lot of times there's some overlap. So if I look at the skills, like I'm in performance, if you're following along in the ACS, I'm under Task F, Performance and Limitations, under the skills elements. It says the applicant exhibits the skill to compute the weight and balance, correct an out-of-CG loading errors, and determine if the weight and balance remains within limits during all phases of flight. And then the next skills element is use the appropriate aircraft performance charts, tables, and data. Okay, so I say, well, okay, if I cover those, if I can go back and now look at the knowledge elements, the first one, elements related to performance and limitations by explaining the use of charts, tables, and data to determine the performance. So it's very likely that gets covered while we're covering the second task under the skills that I talked about. And then if you look under risk management, the applicant is able to identify, assess, and mitigate risk associated with use of performance charts, tables, and data. So again, we don't, it's not, the ground portion of the Checkride is not really compartmentalized, at least the way I handle it. I mean, it's not like, okay, we finished National Airspace System, let's move on to performance and limitations. All this is covered within the context of a flight. And when I say that, so we're talking about a flight. We're going from home airport to whatever airport. And I'll ask the applicant, I'll say, okay, tell me what our takeoff weight is going to be. And they'll give me a number. And I'll say, what is the max takeoff weight? Well, right there, by asking them what the max takeoff weight, I'm covering one of the elements under risk management. It talks about airplane limitations. Well, that's a limitation, the max takeoff weight. So without even really knowing it, we're covering a lot of this stuff. So they'll give me the max takeoff weight, and usually there's a spread of about 100 pounds or so. We're usually about 100 pounds under max takeoff weight. And so I'll throw out the scenario, okay, well, what if I brought a friend along with me? And if it's a lower amount, I'll say, let's say we're 50 pounds under, I'll say, hey, I just brought my dog. Can my dog go? And he weighs 74 pounds. And, I want the applicant to work through the scenario of putting an extra 74 pounds in the back of the airplane. And, are we within the weight limitation? We did a weight and balance show a couple weeks ago where we talked about this. And, again, I'm trying to do a real world scenario. This is really what happens. Can we go with this? And, a lot of times the applicant will say, no, we can't go. We'll be 24 pounds overweight. And, that is an option. And then I say, well, what if me as the person you're taking to the whatever airport says, well, I can't go without my dog. He's my emotional support dog. I got to have him with me. So let's just cancel the flight. And, what I'm trying to get is, do we have other options? I mean, can we take something off the airplane to lower the weight? And by and large, the cross country that I give people is just out of the range of the airplane. So most people do make a fuel stop, but now we have two extremely manageable flights. We have two flights that are maybe 2 to 2.5 hours each. So we're landing with plenty of fuel. So, we start talking about maybe taking some fuel off the airplane and how much fuel we would have to take off the airplane. Obviously in a case of 24 pounds overweight, we could get away with taking 4 gallons of fuel, 4 times 6, right? Or 24 divided by 6, however you want to look at it. And we could fit the weight portion of it. So then I will have them compute the new center of gravity under those circumstances. And I'll use that time to say, well, let's say the center of gravity was way back here, about as far aft as it can go without being out, and we'll start talking about the the disadvantages and or maybe the advantages of an aft CG. And we'll talk about personal limitations. Would you go like this? Would you go, if you're looking at a weight and balance performance graph, the dot is as far to the top as it can go without being out, and it's as far to the right as it can go without being out. What do you think about this? And a lot of people are very skittish about it. They'll say I wouldn't do this. And so then we'll kind of go through that. Why not? Why not? And it's not a wrong answer to not go. But, now with a commercial, it's kind of a different deal. I'll say, well, boy, you're being paid to move people and or things around. And you really need to think about this. So, again, the then we'll get into, of course, that's the weight and balance element of things. But we'll get into more things, when I'll say, okay, well, what true airspeed are we using for this flight? And, they'll say 105 knots, and I'll say, well, where'd you get that? And occasionally you'll get the, well, that's just what we use answer. Okay, well, let's look in the chart and see what the real number is. I'll ask what the fuel burn is, and they'll say 10 gallons an hour. Well, where'd you get that? Well, that's just what we use. Well, that's not the right answer. I'd like them to say, our fuel burn is 8.9 gallons per hour, or whatever the chart says.
So it's really, again, just a dialogue through this material based on the scenario that was probably given to them in your DPE letter or an email telling them what to prepare to come to this check ride.
Right. It is going to feel much more like a discussion, the way I think most of us handle the oral portion. It really is. We're just going to talk about the flight and a lot of what ifs. Okay. A lot of people will say, well, okay, if we're going to take Fido and put him in the back, I don't want to be at max takeoff weight, so I'm going to, instead of making one fuel stop, we're going to make 2 fuel stops. And say, well, okay, that is an option.
So as you get into systems, which is the next task G, operations of systems, man, that list seems very long. But again, if you read the ACS, you need to be aware of those systems, but you're not going to test all that list K1 through K2. You're only going to be doing 3 because that's what the ACS says you're going to do.
Yeah. And again, I will cover this in the context of a flight. I will give a scenario about starting the airplane. It may involve not being able to get the airplane started. It may involve having to get the airplane started using external electric. May involve a fire in start. That, again, I try to pick things that I think are pretty dang important. I'm not going to ask what type of spark plugs we have in the airplane. That knowing that piece of information, I don't think makes you a better or safer pilot. It's not something bad to know, but I don't think it really makes you safer. Knowing what to do if while you're starting the engine and we see flames coming out from underneath the cowling, knowing what to do, I think, makes you a safer pilot, and you might save an airplane. So I will talk through that. I will then take it one step farther and say, okay, well, we've taxied out, and sometimes I'll talk about the run-up. Okay, during the run-up, this happened. We got this indication. That's a little abnormal. What do you think's going on, and what would you do about it? And, a lot of times the blanket answer is, oh, I'm going to taxi back and write it up. Well, that's, that's the blanket get out of jail free card. And I try to say, well, okay, well, how, I suppose it's a weekend and there's no one there to fix the airplane. Well, we just have to cancel the flight. And, I'm trying to make the applicant say, well, maybe there's something we can do. If I walk into, I'm trying to come up with a scenario, but I'm trying to troubleshoot, if you will, and fix the problem. If I walk out to my car and I have a flat tire, I'm probably going to try to put some air in it and monitor it, see if I have a leak, which I probably do. So we'll talk about the power plant from a couple of standpoints, from the run up and from engine starting. I just think it's really important. I mean, without that engine, we're not going anywhere.
Is there something else that you talk about from what we may experience on the flight, or is this just the oral portion, and or do you cover some of this portion on the flight?
Yeah, there are times where you get up in the flight and you'll give them scenarios of, hey, this is what's going on right now in the airplane. I did this with a young man just the other day, and we're not allowed to teach, but just because we don't teach doesn't mean the applicant can't learn. And I would like to think that most people do learn something on my check rides. And we were talking about an electrical failure, and on the ground, and I said, okay, well, we were in a Cessna 172, and I said, okay, tell me everything that we're going to lose. And he went through the list, and he pretty much got everything except for one thing. And now he did say avionics, and I said, okay, well, expand on avionics. And he pretty much got everything. The thing that he missed was the intercom. And so we talked about this. We got in the air, and I said, let's simulate an electrical failure. And I said, take your headset off. And he looked at me like I was crazy. And we took the headset off, and he looked over at me. He goes, wow, it's really, really loud in this airplane. It was a newer airplane. It had a hand mic in it. And again, this is a little bit weird, because if you had an electrical failure, you wouldn't have any radios. But we flew into the airport and did our last landing using the overhead speaker and him talking on the hand mic. And he thought, wow, that was really worthwhile. He says, when and if I become a CFI, I'm gonna expose my students to this. And his CFI was sitting in the debrief going, oh, I've never done that. I'm thinking, well, maybe it's something we ought to do. Losing the intercom. I know when I had my electrical failure in the Saratoga, that was one of the big things. Like, holy cow, we got to take the headsets off and scream at each other.
Yeah, you still want to be able to talk to your passengers. You probably need some help in a situation that is that big of a deal, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's jump to task H, human factors. H for human factors. I think as a private pilot, I struggled with this. I mean, I knew it was important. There seemed to be a lot of memorization, seemed to be a lot of details that I had to know what was happening if my fingernails were turning blue. What's the normal talk track for you, Wally? if you'll so share on what human factors the private applicant needs to understand when they meet with you in the DP or the oral exam room.
Well, I'll throw all kinds of things out there. I will say to them, we're coming around the final turn on the oral, and I'll sometimes say, man, I'm just so tired. I didn't sleep last night, and man, I'm just under a lot of stress. I hope I'm okay on the flight. And I like to get their reaction to them, to what I'm saying. Of course, I'm not the pilot; they're the pilot. But we'll spend a lot of time, a little bit of time talking about that. The other thing that I'll cover almost all the time is if you look at F, it's carbon monoxide poisoning. So here's an example of covering systems and covering a human factors element in the same scenario. I will say, okay, we're up in cruise, and we'll pretend it's winter time, and we're cruising along at maybe 6,500 feet, and I say to you, man, it's cold. Can you turn the heat on? And you turn the heater on, and I say, oh man, that feels good. And then I'll give the symptoms of carbon monoxide, of an exhaust leak. So in essence, we're covering a systems, because then I'll say, well, in a nutshell, tell me how that heater on this single engine airplane works. And they'll explain to me that, hopefully they'll explain that there's some sort of a pipe that we call a shroud around the exhaust system, and it takes warm air from around the exhaust and vents it into the cabin, and that's where we're getting our warm air. So we'll talk about that. So now we've covered a system, but then how are we going to handle carbon monoxide poisoning? Are we going to just leave everything on? Are we going to land immediately? Of course, we're no doctors up there, so we really can't diagnose it, but we know what the symptoms are. And, of course, I'm looking for them to say, I'm going to turn the heater off, I'm going to open up the vents, and I'm going to land the airplane.
Do you feel like this is an area of weakness for private applicants? The human factors section?
I do. I will ask them about medication, and I get a canned answer all the time. I'll say, okay, you wake up the morning of the flight, and you're ready to go, and you've got maybe some allergy symptoms. You got a runny nose, you're sneezing, itchy eyes, and you go in your medicine cabinet and you look in there, and there's some allergy medicine. It just says allergy medicine, and you want to take a couple of those, and you're trying to figure out if you can take this brand of allergy medicine and still fly. And so I'd say 60% of the applicants will say, I'm going to call my AME. Okay, well, there's a canned answer. Well, good luck with that. It's a Saturday evening. Do you have your AME's cell phone number? Is he going to answer? So we'll dig in a little bit deeper as to where you can actually figure out if it's approved medicine. And, that goes down to the effects of alcohol, drugs, and over-the-counter medications. And then, I'll talk about alcohol. It's the night let's say you're leaving at a given time, 10 a.m. today, and last night at 6 p.m. you met an old friend at a Mexican restaurant, and, are you able to have a margarita right now? And most people are very, at least in this situation, they're very careful. They say, well, yeah, legally I am. It's 8 hours, but I wouldn't. I get that. more times than not. But I mean, if you want one, I mean, it's legal. So anyway, so yeah, this is all stuff that, when we think about learning to fly an airplane, we want to get in the airplane, start it, and we want to go fly. We don't sit here and talk about, oh boy, dehydration and nutrition and hypothermia, optical illusion, spatial disorientation, motion sickness. That's one that, it's more common than people think. I've gotten quite a few people, and I think we actually did a show a long time ago about combating motion sickness. It's not a deal breaker. It's something that needs to be managed, but man, sometimes you get sick. Sometimes you get sick in an airplane. Luckily me, it's only happened to me once, but I was a new pilot, and I was flying with a guy doing pipeline patrol. So we were down low in turbulence, and I just remember ruining his water bottle. He had a very nice thermos, and that's all we had, and I filled it up, and I had to go buy him a new one the next day.
The next section really is a new section. It's area of operations. And we have a new task start. So it's task A, pre-flight assessment. I always want to ask questions of you, Wally, that we don't get to talk about as just acquaintances or buddies. What do you think the longest pre-flight is you've ever watched on a check ride is in time?
Probably 45 minutes. Yeah.
And this was a single engine, I'm assuming. Like, this wasn't a multi-engine. This was just a single engine private pilot student.
Oh yeah, and these type check rides usually involve 3 or 4 walks back into the hangar or back into the flight school. They'll go out and they start doing things, and then all of a sudden they might realize that I need a quart of oil, so they'll walk in, they'll go get the quart of oil, and then they'll put it in, and they get a little oil on their hands, and so then they go back in to wash their hands. That's number 2, back to the flight school. And then before they're ready to actually fly, they go in to use the restroom. So that's number 3. I guess one of my frustrations as an examiner, we're time limited, and there are days that we're trying to get a couple of check rides in. And so many times I go out there and I watch the applicant walk around. I'll ask a couple of questions, and then we're almost ready to go, and I see them on their phone. I say, "What are you doing?" They say, I'm calling to get fuel." I'm going, wait a minute. We've been out here for 45 minutes, and we are just now checking the fuel quantity. I mean, and now I've gotten to where before we even start the ground portion, I will say, hey, can we make arrangements to have this airplane properly fueled so we're ready to go? So I joke that I'm going to be lying on my deathbed, and I'm going to wish I had the many days back that I have spent standing around waiting for fuel trucks.
Oh my gosh, I can't imagine how painful that is. But you're observing. They're doing their pre-flight. They're trying to be on their best behavior. They're trying not to miss anything. Hopefully they're using the checklist appropriately. But you're not expecting it to be an abnormal pre-flight. You're expecting it to be the pre-flight they're going to do the next day when they're taking their friend up for a flight. True or false?
Absolutely. And
that should be thorough, but not 45 minutes.
Right. Yeah. We don't need to, they're looking at data plates, cross-referencing serial numbers against that. I mean, if that's what you do every time, well, then do that. But, yeah, don't feel like you're putting, I know you do feel like you're putting on a performance for the examiner, but just do your normal thing. Just do your normal pre-flight that you've been trained to do. It's one thing. I mean, if you're doing a pre-flight on an airplane that hadn't flown in 2 years, and or an airplane, better yet, an airplane that just came out of annual. Oh, they just brought the airplane from the mechanic shop. Yeah, we just finished the annual. Okay, that's going to get a pretty extensive pre-flight from me. Okay, now things can always break. Just because an airplane just flew in doesn't mean it can fly out. That's why we do the pre-flight. That's why we do the mag checks, because there's a point where, okay, that mag check is fine, and then, at some point the mag check is not fine. So that's why we do it. But yeah, you don't have to put on a show.
So we've done with the pre-flight. We're sitting in the plane together. I had a unique experience on my private where the DP would not close his door, and I didn't know if it was a test or not. Are you in the mindset of trying to trick people, or are you on the up and up and just trying to observe?
Well, that's a loaded question, because I will say, especially in a Piper where there's a little bit more to do to close the door, there are many check rides I've taken off and left that door open just to see how that applicant handles it. And a lot of them will say, I've never closed the door in my life. And I go, well, geez. Well, first of all, that can't really be true, because you got to have some solo time. So there have to be some times where you close the door yourself. But to the CFIs out there, I would encourage you, especially, some Cessnas, you got to put the little handle down. But some of them, you just close the door, right? And that you just slam it. But I would encourage you, CFIs, make sure that your student knows how to close the door, and a lot of times on a Piper, I'll see them do the bottom latch, and then they reach up and they do the top latch, and it doesn't catch, but they don't catch that it didn't catch. And so sometimes we'll take off, we'll get in the air, and I will comment, I'll look up and I'll go, man, it's really cool how in this airplane I can see the sky. And they look up and go, oh boy. And well, how are we going to handle this? I mean, I think if you've flown long enough, you're going to have a door coming open in the air or on the takeoff roll, and it can be disastrous. I know of a flight school that lost a twin-engine airplane because the door popped on the takeoff roll, and they tried to reject, and it didn't work out very well, and they totaled the airplane. But I'm going to say, in my however many thousands of hours, I probably had 5, 6, 7 of them for real, and I'm not talking about scenarios where I left the door open.
So you're not tricking us, but you're going to let us make mistakes. We need to do a passenger briefing. We need to manage the flight deck, which is task B. And again, if we go to the skills section, right, we have to make sure we do a couple of things. But it's an open book. Literally, we understand that we're going to have to secure the aircraft. We're going to have to do a passenger briefing. We got to identify who's pilot in command. We got to demonstrate the shoulder harness. All of this is at the student's fingertips, and they could almost chair fly the flight portion of a check ride by understanding the skills they're going to have to exhibit, and probably be pretty well prepared for when they are in the plane with you. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And it is a little bit awkward, because I tell my applicants in the briefing, I will say, look, for the purposes of this flight, I have never flown in a small airplane. I've flown in airliners, but I have never flown in a small airplane. So brief me accordingly, okay? So I want them to give me a good brief. And again, when I say good brief, good brief doesn't mean long brief. You can brief. I think you can brief the required items probably in about 45 seconds. And briefing doesn't mean lecturing, okay? And a lot of times people just start, they go off on their little speech, and I do my best to show them that I'm not paying attention. I mean, I'm looking out the window and maybe even whistling, or I'll pull out my iPad, which is in my lap. I'll make it obvious to them that I'm not paying attention, and I want them to look at me and say, draw my attention back in. So they need to, you need to communicate that briefing, not just read a script.
So we're going to go through the normal procedures. Hopefully we've done this dozens of times with our flight instructor, but starting the engine, same thing. I think I shared this in the previous episode that we had a student or applicant recently fail for not clearing the prop, but it's part of what this says, right? We have to be able to understand and be safe as it relates to propeller safety. And there's been millions of stories. We've told stories about dogs dying and other things in the past, but you gotta yell clear prop. You gotta make sure there's nobody going to stand close to the prop when you start that plane. And then I think we've spent a lot of time in part 1 and part 2 here. Then this is the ACS where we start paying attention, I think, as flight instructors. Unfortunately, we talk about taxiing the airplane, we talk about crosswind, and then everything else is now like a maneuver. Would you agree? Like everything else in the ACS is a maneuver, Wally, and it's where we as instructors spend all of our time trying to fly the maneuvers correctly.
Yeah.
But there's so much technique and there's so much that has to occur to be a good pilot that I always joke it's a little bit less about the flying and more about the knowledge thereof, because the turning the yoke is pretty easy at the end of the day. Yeah.
Well, I laugh that if you look under the instrument elements under the flying with reference to the instruments, one of the tasks is straight and level flight. And I think everybody goes, oh, yeah, we got that. All right, let's move on to turns. Let's move on to climbs. Let's do this and this and this. You'd be surprised at how many people struggle with straight and level flight. And 9 times out of 10, the airplane is out of trim. 99 times out of 100, the airplane is out of trim. So that's somebody who they haven't done it very much. Okay, now you got to do a couple of cross countries with your instructor, but I think the instructor, maybe we get up to our altitude of 3,500 feet, 4,500 feet, and as soon as we level off, they're okay. Now let's talk about this, blah 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 blah, and all along the way the student is struggling with properly trimming the airplane, and it's such a basic thing, and I see advanced, I see CFIIs struggling keeping the airplane on an altitude. I mean, we're up 100, down 100, up 100, down 100, and it's we get to the point where I say, okay, let's put the hood on, and they'll give me the airplane, and boy, I let go, and we're pitching up at 700 feet a minute.
They've been fighting that thing, choking that yoke the whole time.
And I'll just give it back to them like that. I'll just, okay, sorry, I got 300 feet high. You need to fix that.
And they're thinking, man, I'm a better pilot than this DPE over here. I don't lose 300 feet like that quick.
Yeah.
So we haven't even really left the ground, right? We've taxied. We're at the before takeoff task of task F. We've hopefully used our checklist. Hopefully we've got a taxi diagram on our knee board. Hopefully we've done all of the right things to this point. But we haven't even got to areas of Operation 3 yet, and I think we got to pause. Maybe we do part 3 of this and deliver it in a couple weeks so that everybody can really hear from you as a designated pilot examiner on what we're expecting, because we haven't even covered communications, as you said, instrument flying, all the maneuvers. We got a lot of stuff. I vote we do part 3. What do you think?
I definitely think so. This may morph into even more than part 3, but yeah, I agree with that.
All right. Well, with that, we'll wrap up today. As always, we really appreciate you listening. Hopefully you'll share the show with your friends. Give us a 5-star review if we've earned it. And as always, stay behind the prop. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.